poder hablar, Claire va a hacer la charla en inglés, ¿vale? Si podéis poner esto. Pero Claire habla español. ¿Ok? Habla español y así que las preguntas podréis hacer las preguntas. Great. Vamos a empezar a conectar.
Hola. Hola,
Claire. Bienvenido a WebCongress. ¿Me escuchas bien?
Sí, te escucho bien.
Perfecto. ¿Me ves bien?
Un momentito. Estoy cerrando como todo mis ventanas y todo. Sí.
Perfecto. Mira, Claire, voy a girar el ordenador, ¿ok? Voy a enseñarte al público que te está escuchando.
¿Se cortó? ¿Hola?
Sí, te pido un momento.
¿Me ves o está cortando?
Nosotros te vemos estupendamente. ¿Me ves?
Sí, te veo, no
okay.
Me está cortando un poquito.
¿Ves el público? ¿Puedes ver el público?
Sí. Hola.
Hola. ¿Qué tal? Claire, tenemos tu presentación lista en la pantalla de al lado. ¿Sí? ¿Me escuchas?
¿Sí? ¿Algo?
Sí.
No.
Tenemos tu presentación lista en la pantalla de al lado. ¿Ok?
Perfecto.
La única regla es decir slide cuando quieres que te cambiemos el slide. ¿Ok?
Perfecto.
Claire, this is your turn. Cuando quieres.
Perfecto. Hola, ¿qué tal? Gracias por estar acá y todo. Acá por Skype y todo. Sé que ustedes están como al final de un día muy largo y todo, pero para mí nada más estoy empezando mi día. Bueno, como ustedes saben, me llamo Claire Ortiz y trabajo acá en Twitter. Y bueno, tengo que confesar que voy a dar mi presentación en inglés porque siempre practico en inglés y me parece que si lo doy en castellano algo va a fallar. Pues voy a como empezar y continuar y todo en inglés, pero al final cuando tenemos preguntas y todo podemos hacerlos en castellano y no es necesario traducirlos y todo.
Perfecto.
Bueno, pues voy a empezar con la presentación y ustedes ahora, como ven, voy a cambiar en inglés. So right now you see the slide that just is gray that says Twitter, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, let me get started then.
Done.
So next slide.
Done.
So hi again, my name is Claire Ortiz, as I said, and I work here at Twitter. Here at Twitter, I lead social innovation philanthropy. And basically that means that every day I work with organizations and businesses and individuals who want to use the platform of Twitter to really make a difference in the world. So today we're just going to talk through a little bit of sort of the macro, the big scale idea of Twitter and why it works in the world. And then I want to get into some best practices and ideas for you all of how you can best use it to make a difference in your communities and in the lives around you. So next slide.
Okay.
So I also am the author of Twitter for Good, Change the World One Tweet at a Time, which is a book that's coming out next month. The foreword was written by Biz Stone, one of the co-founders of Twitter. And this book really brings together a lot of the ideas that we're going to talk about today. And it really encourages everyone out there to be using Twitter in practical ways daily to have an impact on their communities. Next slide.
Okay.
So I know you all are very familiar with Twitter, you're very familiar with social media, but I still am going to step back a little and talk about kind of the origins of Twitter and how we got to where we are today, because I think it sets the scene correctly for the conversation we're about to have. So on your screen you see one of the original sketches of Twitter, and this was done by co-founder Jack Dorsey back in 2006. And what I really like about this sketch is that even though co-founders Jack Dorsey and Evan Williams and Biz Stone had incredible dreams for what Twitter would become, in the beginning they were very practical about what the service meant. And if you look at the sketch, you see that, initially their idea was, okay, using Twitter, you could say exactly what you were doing each day. So, I'm in bed, or I'm going to the park. You see these things on the sketch. And I think this is important to look back at, because we can now see 5 years later how the way that Twitter is now used in the world was really created from the users. It was not a top-down approach to creating a service and hoping that the world would use it. Instead, it really was about putting a service out there and letting the users and letting the public change it to be really what it is today. So let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
So this first picture you should see is of a man on his mobile phone. Do you see that?
Yes.
Great. So I'm just going to go through 4 short stories about people who really use Twitter to completely change the world and how it's really changed our idea of what Twitter is used for. This is James Buck. He is a journalist, and he was a student in California in 2008 when he went out to Egypt to cover some protests, some government protests. And one day, in the midst of covering some of these government protests, he was arrested by the police there. And they put him in a van, and he realized after he was arrested that he still had his mobile phone on him. So he was able to send out a tweet from his mobile phone, and it just read one word. It read one word, arrested. And that tweet really came back to the US immediately and was able to mobilize his friends and family to start the process of getting him released. And the next tweet he sent, which was that same day, only a few hours later, just said one word, freed. And this is just a great early example of how people and users were really using Twitter in ways that, the original founders could only dream of. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay, the pictures. Yes.
So this is a photo just of Haiti. This was in 2010. Obviously, in 2011, we've seen even more examples of the way Twitter has been used in natural disasters. And in Haiti, as in the tsunami this past year, Twitter was used as really a lifeline, as a way to connect people with resources and to connect people with outside news services. So this is really just one more example of some of the great ways Twitter is used. Next slide.
Next picture, right? Yes.
And so this is a photo just showing some of the protests in Iran in 2008. And this is, of course, far before the Arab Spring of 2011. We were watching how Twitter was used in cases of civil unrest to get out the word and to explain the origins of movements. Next slide.
Yes.
And this was just a really powerful picture early on that was sent via TwitPic when this US Airways airplane went down in the Hudson River in New York, and one of the people on board took this picture and sent out this TwitPic right after it happened. And it was just one more example of the way that Twitter was used in the moment to really show exactly what was happening. Next slide.
Yes.
So people say that Twitter is a social network a lot, and sometimes people even still say that Twitter is a micro-blogging service. But really overwhelmingly, Twitter is a real-time information network. And so this is something I just like to emphasize to anyone whenever I talk to them about Twitter or share stories about the way Twitter is used. Next slide. So we're just going to go through a few numbers here just to show you about sort of the power and the magnitude. Twitter now has more than 200 million registered accounts, so not 200,000, 200 million. Next slide. There are 460,000 new accounts created each and every day. Next slide.
Yeah.
every day we're seeing more than 185 million tweets. Importantly, when we look at the tsunami on March 11th of 2011, we saw 177,000 on that day. Next slide. Oh, just to check in, are you now on a slide that says operating principles?
Yes, it is.
Great. So, Twitter as a company has 8 operating principles, and the first one is be a force for good. And I think this is important to everyone at the company, certainly, but it's more important than ever to me, since my mandate here is really working with individuals and organizations and businesses to make a difference in the world. So this is something that's really important to me. Next slide. So today, we're now going to jump into some more practical steps about really how to be a force for good on Twitter. And I like to emphasize that being a force for good on Twitter is not just about being a nonprofit organization or anything like that. Businesses and individuals are making a difference every day in their cities, in their countries, and in their worlds, essentially, by using Twitter in smart ways to talk about their brands and talk about their passions and to reach their goals. So I'm going to talk to you now about a model I created, which is called model, which is basically a 5-step model teaching you how to excel on Twitter. And really the point of this is I want you to excel on Twitter so that you can make a difference. Next slide.
Okay.
So the tweet model is 5 steps, and we'll go through each of them now, and I hope that at the end of this, we'll talk about this for maybe another 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and I hope that at the end, you'll be able to come away with some really tangible ways to improve your Twitter performance. So there are 5 steps in the tweet model. There's target, write, engage, explore, and track. And so we're going to start with target, T for target. Next slide. So are you on a slide that says, what is your goal?
Yes.
Great. So when we think about a target on Twitter, the idea here is that you're not going to get where you're going unless you have a goal. So it's important before getting on Twitter, or even once you've already been on Twitter but you want to create a new Twitter strategy, to really think about what your goal is. Next slide. And I think all organizations and individuals on Twitter, practically every account that exists on Twitter of all those 200 million accounts, can break down into one of 3 areas. There's the information account, the personalized account, and the fundraising account. Sometimes the fundraising account I call a direct appeal account. You can think of a fundraising account as a way to specifically ask questions and get responses. So I just want to go through these 3 different types of accounts and see where you guys think you fall as I talk about them. Sometimes it may be really obvious to you if you immediately are one of these accounts or want to be one of these accounts, but sometimes it takes a little bit more digging. Next slide. So you're on a slide now that says room to read, correct?
Yes.
Great. So room to read is an example of an information account. An information account is one of the more popular accounts that exist on Twitter. And essentially the purpose of an information account is to convey information. It's obvious, right? People want to be an information hub for whatever resource of information they are sharing to the world. So this is one example of an organization called Room to Read that provides literacy opportunities to girls and underprivileged kids in 9 developing countries. And Room to Read is an organization that we have worked with a lot closely here at Twitter, and it's a very popular organization throughout the world. Now, the Room to Read Twitter account, which is their handle, Room to Read, is all about being an information account. And their aim is really to provide as much information as possible about global literacy to those out there. So this is one example of an information account and what it looks like. It's conveying new ideas and common popular articles about whatever topic of your choice. Next slide. Now this is the second type of account. This is a personalized account. The point of a personalized account is really to show a personal voice to your business or organization. And I use this as an example because this person, John Wood, is the CEO of Root to Read, the organization that we just looked at. So while the organization has an organizational information account, the individual, in this case the CEO, has a personal account. And on his personal account, he shares constant insights from his personal life and his personal travels of, he's traveling all over the world. He goes running every day. I think that's a big part of his account. Every day he's sharing about running in a different city and this sort of thing. And really the idea of a personal account is to show an interesting new insight into your organization by giving personal flavor. Next slide. I like to show this here. This is Ushahidi, which is a great organization that does crisis mapping all over the world. Ushahidi got started in the Kenya elections in 2008 during some election violence at the time. And since then, they've expanded dramatically, and their platform is used by many individuals in cases of natural disaster or civil unrest to provide basically crisis mapping. And I show the Ushahidi account here because this is another example of a personal account on Twitter, but it's not done by an individual. Creating a personal account isn't just about one person writing. It can be an organization writing, but it's about showing personal flavor. So for instance, this is the Ushahidi account, and you see how along the side they have pictures of their individual team members. You see how the way they tweet is more personal and more conversational. And these are all ways and strategies that they've found to better reach their users. Next slide. So are you on a slide that's National Wildlife Federation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So National Wildlife Federation is a very old foundation in the United States, about 75 years old, and I like to talk about them as an example of a personal account because while many people come on Twitter to start their business or to get word out about their business for the first time, National Wildlife Federation is an example of an organization that existed for many, many years. So when they came onto Twitter, the challenge for them wasn't to find a way to let people know they existed. It was rather to transition their audience to a new platform. And they found that the best way to do this was by being a personal account. So while they could maintain a lot of their informational status by sending out their newsletters and their emails and keeping their website very professional and information-based, they were able to use their Twitter account as a way to be much more personal. And this is often a strategy that works for businesses and organizations. Next slide. The final type of account I want to talk about is a fundraising account. Now, fundraising is the term I use for nonprofits, but for businesses, oftentimes a fundraising account, it makes more sense to say a direct ask account. Essentially an account where you have one specific thing you want from your followers. So for nonprofits, sometimes that one specific thing is to gain money. So one example of the way fundraising accounts work is this foundation called Surfrider. And they've done something interesting that you can see in this slide, where Surfrider is an organization that helps to protect the world's oceans. And they have many different individual chapters, like many businesses or organizations. Now, instead of creating a consistent brand and making sure they're mandating that consistent brand across all their individual Twitter chapter accounts, they've let each chapter be creative on their own. As you can see in the bottom of the slide, these are all different examples of logos that the Surfrider chapter in Morocco or in San Francisco or in Chicago is using. And some businesses might really reject that because they want to be able to control the brand from the top. But Surfrider has found that essentially by letting some creativity out there and letting people own their own chapters and own portions, they are able to fundraise more. And so sometimes you see organizations taking a similar approach when it comes to customer service. So let's go to the next slide. So again, we just looked at the target. So this is, the first thing to do when you get on Twitter or when you're trying to recreate your Twitter strategy is to come up with your target and your goal of what you want to achieve. And I just talked to you about the 3 main goals that I see Twitter accounts wanting to achieve. So now we're going to talk about the right steps, so the W in the 5-step process. And writing is all about getting your words out there. Next slide. So the hard part of writing, we're talking about the writing step right now. So you're now on the slide that says just start. Really, the hardest part for many organizations and businesses and individuals getting on Twitter is about just getting out there and starting. People get so nervous about what kind of text to put out there and how to do their tweets and how to go about doing that. And so this step is really about encouraging you to get started, whatever your strategy is. So let's go to the next step. So the person I most like to talk about how you should tweet on Twitter, and the person I think you can most learn from when working on how to tweet is Kanye West. You guys, I'm sure, know Kanye West as the famed rapper. And I like to talk about him because his story of getting started on Twitter and continuing to write and get his message out there on Twitter is a great example of someone not over-editing themselves. So this is Kanye West's first tweet. Kanye West was in Silicon Valley hanging out with Ron Conway, who's one of the big investors and advisors to Twitter. One morning last year, Ron was suggesting to Kanye that he get on Twitter and he start tweeting. So they came over to the Twitter office, and about half an hour before they arrived, all the employees, we received an email saying that Kanye West is going to be, in the reception area, come join him. And so we did. And Kanye started rapping, and then we saw his first tweet. And if you see his first tweet here, up early in the morning, take meetings in Silicon Valley. Now this is not Silicon Valley, correct? So next tweet. He immediately sent a second tweet. LOL, laughing out loud, I spelled silicon wrong. I guess I was still thinking about the other type of silicone. It's a process. And I just love this because it just shows how hysterically someone can tweet something completely grammatically incorrect and be as ridiculous as Kanye and yet not stop tweeting. So people in the beginning thought that, Kanye, like many celebrities and like many individuals who get on Twitter, he probably won't be able to keep up this pattern of tweeting and this pattern of continued engagement on Twitter. But impressively, Kanye has. Next slide. He keeps tweeting completely ridiculous things every day, and you should follow him for that. I don't ever watch dramas on a plane. I don't want things to be reflect. Next slide.
Okay.
Ha 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 ha. 140. Next slide. My beautiful, dark, twisted fantasies. And next slide, the mosquitoes suck. This is one of my favorites. So the point of this is really just to show that different strategies work for different people. And for Kanye, his strategy of being personal, if you're counting he had a personal strategy, it worked for him. So he started going, he went going strong.
¿Qué ha comprado Skype últimamente? ¿Qué cosa? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Now, yes, now.
I don't know what's going on. I'm in the office. I don't know why the internet isn't working. Okay. What slide do you have on your side?
Mosquitoes suck.
Great. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
So the point of really talking about Kanye is that, sure, Kanye is ridiculous, but he's also a great, entertaining character on Twitter who found a strategy that worked for him and just kept going. So he's motivation to anyone out there who's worried about over-editing or editing themselves when they get started on Twitter. Remember that you really just can't get going. So I want to also bring up, though, that the writing step, so this is the second step in the process, is not just about text, it's also about media. Charity Water is an organization that is very known for its featured photo of the day. They send out one impressive, important, impactful photo each and every day, and followers are used to that and respond to it well. Next slide. And since Charity Water started doing this about 2 years ago, we see many other accounts follow suit, sending out photos of the day, or videos of the day, or quotes of the day. Anything is another way to involve followers. Next step. So you're back on the tweet model slide, right?
Yeah.
Great. So now we're going to go into the third step, which is about engaging. So the engage step is really, to show that if you're Kanye, you might be able to come on Twitter and have hundreds of thousands of people immediately get involved with you. But if you're a normal person, you can't just sign onto Twitter and wait for the world to come. You need to go out there and start interacting with people. Next slide. So there are three main sort of things to talk about within the engage step. The first is functionality. There are typical functional things that you can use on Twitter every day to help you engage. Hashtags, lists, @replies, and direct messages are just some of the ways that people really engage on Twitter and some of the tools Twitter offers to help you engage. Next slide. Asking a question is one of the other greatest tools I think works on Twitter. And oftentimes when people ask me what they should do when they first get on Twitter, I say, go on and ask a question. So this is just an example of a question that Hope 140 is the account that Twitter manages for all of its Force for Good efforts. And this is just an example of a question I was asking on it about interesting uses of Twitter in Africa. Next slide. Finally, the step of engaging is really about jumping in and helping when you think you can meet a need. So this is an example of the National Wildlife Federation, which was the organization I told you about, runs a children's magazine. And so I like this example because it shows how someone at National Wildlife Federation is really able to use their Twitter account to meet a direct need of a follower. So in this slide, you can see that this follower wrote a tweet that said, "Dear National Wildlife Federation, I would happily renew my kids' magazine subscriptions if your site worked." Next slide. National Wildlife Federation was able to see this tweet, fix the problem, and respond to the follower. So the follower then writes, "National Wildlife Federation magazine resubscribes success and great magazines for kids." Next slide. So again, these are just examples of ways to engage on Twitter. And one of the other big ways to make sure you're engaging is to be using Twitter via mobile. So anyone in any country in the world can use Twitter via smartphone. But in about 70 countries in the world, you can use Twitter via SMS. 40404 is the Twitter shortcode in the US, and I think it might be the Twitter shortcode in Spain. But you guys would know better. Do you know if 40404 is the Twitter shortcode in Spain?
¿Ese es el número para mandar tweets por SMS? No, I guess it's another one. ¿Conocéis cuál es? No, this is something we have to listen. No se puede. Okay. We think that they told me that I think in Spain we can't yet send tweets by SMS. We can do
Really?
Yeah. What happens?
Interesting.
I think we can do it from
Well, that's
Spain.
bad. Well, that's very unfortunate.
I tried.
All right, I'll follow up with you. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
So we're now back to the overall tweet model slide, and we've come down to the fourth step, which is about exploring. And exploring is about finding new connections and finding new tools to use on Twitter. Next slide. So one of the key ways to really explore on Twitter is to search for yourself. Next slide. And you see the map of Haiti, that slide?
Yeah.
Are you on the Haiti map slide?
We have right now Fireside East, Fireside.
Sí, perfecto, Fireside International.
Correct.
Okay, so Fireside International is a media technology company in Haiti, and they use Twitter constantly. They tweet about 20 times a day. And they were developing an English language class for one of their media technology schools in Haiti last year. And they realized that as part of the class, they wanted to offer some online materials. So they did some research and found that Rosetta Stone was the best English language material software program that they wanted to use. And when they did some research and figured out the cost of how much it would cost to buy subscriptions to Rosetta Stone for all their students, they found that it was going to cost $18,000, which was a sum they did not have at the time. So instead of paying for Rosetta Stone, they sent out a tweet, basically saying that they needed this and they were curious if Rosetta Stone would be able to fund it or to donate it. And because the people at Rosetta Stone are on Twitter and are searching for themselves, they're looking for every instance of how they are coming up in other people's conversation, they were able to see that Fireside International was talking about them and meet this need, and ultimately donate an incredible amount of supplies to this nonprofit media company. Next slide. So searching for yourself, as in that past example, is clearly key, but it's also important to search for influencers. One of the most important ways that individuals and business
Tenemos mejor internet en España. Yes, conectada. Hi again.
Hello again.
Bad connection internet.
So we're back.
Into the office.
Okay. Okay, so we're back on. There's a slide and a picture of a man and a woman.
New York Times.
Yes? Yes, okay. So I think what I was saying when I cut out is that searching on Twitter is not just about searching for yourself, but it's about searching for influencers, searching for powerful people that can help your business or organization to reach your goals. So this is a perfect example of how this works on Twitter. Here you have Nick Kristof, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist from the New York Times, and you have Abby Falik, the CEO of Global Citizen Year, which is an organization that sends individuals who graduate from high school out on year-long apprenticeships in the developing world. Abby, on the right there, the woman, knew that Nick Kristof was a supporter of international education programs for teenagers. And so she had long been following Nick in his New York Times columns and in his books, and then she started following him on Twitter. And after following him on Twitter for a while, she then started to reach out to him and essentially to send him replies and to retweet his messages and to try and engage with him in this way. Eventually, he noticed Abby. He noticed the cause of Global Citizen Year, and he began responding. He began sending out replies back. He began retweeting them. And ultimately, the two of them were able to build a relationship, and he became an influencer for Global Citizen Year, an activist and a supporter. Eventually, this led to him even writing about them in the New York Times more than once. So this is just one example of many millions out there, I'm sure, of the way that individuals have been able to find influencers on Twitter and really use the power of the service to get them to help them with their goals. So let's go to the next slide. So finally, we're back at the tweet model, and I'm just going to go back to the last step here, which is tracking. You know, you will never know where you're getting if you're not looking at your results, and so it's important to always keep this in mind. Next step. Tracking is about figuring out if you've met your goals and re-strategizing and then meet them later. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
I like to talk about this, or you see Born to Fly.
Yes.
Okay, so this is an organization that saw it on September 9th of 2009, 9909. They wanted to raise $90,000 against child slavery. And they had a large campaign on Twitter, and although they tried very hard, they were not able to reach their goal. So this was very disappointing for the organization, but after a few months of reflection, they were able to get back and really think, we want to try this again in 2010. And so for 2010, they set a new goal. They wanted to have 10,000 people each give $10 to raise $100,000 on this one day. And, they were able to use the tools that they learned in their failed attempt in 2009 to do better the next year. And this is really the point of the tracking step in this model, is you've employed all these other steps in the process, and now you're at the point where you're tracking. And tracking is about seeing if you didn't reach your goal, what you can then do to try to reach it in the future. This isn't about beating yourself up, but it is about getting better and slowly getting better and better. So let's go to the next slide. So again, we've just gone through 5 steps here that I hope will help you in learning to better sell on Twitter and learning to better get out the message about your business or your organization or your cause. So again, we've gone through targeting, which is choosing a goal, writing, which is getting yourself out there and not editing yourself too much, engaging, which is about really involving yourself with other people on the platform and conversing with them. We've done explore, which is the 4th step, which is about finding new influencers and keeping track of the way people are talking about you on Twitter. And finally, we've looked at tracking, which is really about tracking your results. You need to know if what you're doing is working. So ultimately, I think with these 5 steps, most people can find a great deal of success on the platform no matter what their goal is and no matter what the purpose is for using Twitter. So that was really, just what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. And I'd love to jump into any questions. We can go to the question slide now.
Okay, great.
And if you guys have questions, we can talk about them more. I wanted to also show you Hope 140 is one of the websites we keep at Twitter, which is really our Force for Good website that helps individuals to learn best practices and to better figure out ways to really engage on the platform. So this is one more resource that you can also turn to when you're trying to figure out what to do next. But it sounds like maybe now would be a time to open up for any specific questions that individuals might have.
Okay, now there's ¿alguna pregunta? ¿Quieren alguna pregunta? Okay, I have in Spanish or English? Spanish or English?
Quiero preguntar algo. Está bien si hacen las preguntas en castellano, está perfecto, pero ¿puede ser posible escribir las preguntas por Skype? Porque me parece que la conexión no está súper bien y no te puedo escuchar muy bien.
Okay.
Sería como fantástico si alguien tenía una pregunta, vos puedes como traducir, escribirlo para que yo pueda como ver Skype y después yo pueda hablar.
Ok. Te la voy a escribir y la voy a poner la voy a decir a voz alta. La pregunta que quiero hacer es, en el caso de que haya una empresa que tiene una actividad comercial y una cuenta en Twitter comercial y quiere hacer alguna acción humanitaria o de ese tipo, ¿se tiene que hacer una cuenta diferente o utilizar la misma cuenta?
Bueno, la pregunta es, si una empresa tiene cuenta corporativa en Twitter y quiere montar una campaña humanitaria, ¿debería crear otra cuenta o usar la cuenta como corporativa? Bueno, yo recibo esa pregunta mucho y te voy a decir que, bueno, a muchas personas les gusta crear como cuentas distintas, pero yo siempre digo que todo debe estar como una cuenta. En serio, es mucho mejor. Porque lo que pasa es que si una compañía, por ejemplo, tiene una cuenta más o menos grande y quiere como distinguirse de la campaña, digo, por tener otra cuenta, como que nada más está hablando de la campaña humanitaria y todo, lo que pasa es que esa compañía va a pasar tanto tiempo nada más intentando de como trasladar a los usuarios de la cuenta grande a la cuenta más chiquita. Y eso siempre es un problema y como usa recursos que no es necesario. Como para mí, compañías deben usar una cuenta para todos, si pueden. Bueno, obviamente vamos a hablar un poquito sobre instancias en que las compañías deben tener dos cuentas. Por ejemplo, si hay un CEO y él quiere hablar más personalmente y todo, eso es una razón buenísima para tener una cuenta separada, ¿entendés? Pero a mí me parece que es importante como tener como una cuenta por casi todo. Muchas veces veo eso, especialmente con empresas como de las televisiones, como los canales de televisión, y siempre pienso que es un problema. Bueno, esa es mi opinión.
Ok. Otra pregunta que es, ¿cómo ves philanthropic en castellano? ¿Cómo se dice en castellano? Philanthropic. ¿Sí?
¿Cómo ves la inversión en Twitter promover para campañas humanitarias o gastar dinero en Twitter para una causa filantrópica?
Hola. ¿Sí?
Bueno, no sé si... Bueno, voy a explicar un poquito cómo es el problema de Twitter for non-profits. Bueno, hace 2 años, ¿sí?
Yes.
¿Viste algo?
Sí. ¿Sí? ¿Me escuchas?
Sí, okay. So, en abril de 2010, Twitter empezó como su primer programa promoted y se llamaba Promoted Tweets. Y cuando lanzamos ese programa, lanzamos con 6 empresas, 6 compañías y 2 ONGs. Y bueno, todo el mundo a mí me pareció que muchas personas no se dieron cuenta de que en el lanzamiento teníamos 2 ONGs para empezar, como 6 compañías y 2 ONGs. Y desde ese momento, desde abril de 2010, hemos tenido ese programa de Promoted Tweets para campañas filantrópicas que son como gratis para ONGs. Y tenemos información sobre eso en ese sitio de web que te mostré un slide de ese sitio de web, hope140.org. Y es...
Uy, ¿ven? Vamos a terminar con esa pregunta. Si alguien tiene una pregunta, levanta la mano ahora. luego terminaré. Bien. Bien, te escuchamos.
¿Escuchas ahora?
Sí.
Bueno, no sé qué pasa con la conexión, pero tenemos un programa que se llama Twitter for Nonprofits y hay 5 distintas partes de este programa y 5 distintas cosas que ofrecemos a ONGs cada día para hacer sus campañas desde Twitter. Y bueno, es una oportunidad fantástica para ONGs en cualquier país que deben usarlo. Y bueno, se puede encontrar más información, se trata de eso en hope140.org.
Ok, Claire, creo que no hay más preguntas. Muchísimas gracias. Un aplauso, por favor, para Claire.